My niece said I peaked in high school. She didn't know I peaked at 30,000 feet over Fallujah, providing close air support. The clinking of champagne flutes was a specific frequency of grating. It vibrated through the polished hardwood floor of my brother's oversized house, a place that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and recycled air. It was the sound of self-congratulation. I stood near a wall of glass overlooking a meticulously manicured lawn, my back to the bulk of the room, nursing a glass of club soda. The ice had already melted. It was warm. I preferred it that way. Cold drinks made my hands ache, a lingering gift from a high G bailout over the Adriatic years ago that nobody here knew about. This was an engagement party for my niece, Madison. She was 28, an age I remembered as being filled with the scent of jet fuel and the constant low-grade hum of adrenaline. For Madison, it was filled with the glow of a phone screen and the hunt for viral audio clips. She called herself a content creator, an influencer. I was never entirely sure what that meant, other than it involved talking at a camera with a manufactured earnestness that set my teeth on edge. Her fiancé was a young man named Chad. He had the soft hands of someone who had never fixed his own engine and the easy, unearned confidence of a trust fund. He wore a pastel blazer that probably cost more than the new set of tires I'd just put on my Wrangler. He was talking loudly about his latest venture, something to do with cryptocurrency and NFTs, using a vocabulary that was deliberately opaque. It was a performance, and the family was his captive audience. They nodded along, their faces a mixture of feigned interest and genuine awe at the sums of money being thrown around. I watched them all. My brother, Richard, Madison's father, puffed out his chest as Chad spoke. He saw the boy as a success, a validation of his own life choices. My sister-in-law, Carol, fluttered around, ensuring everyone's glass was full, her smile as brittle as the spun sugar on the dessert table. They were good people, I suppose. They just operated on a different wavelength. Their battles were fought over property lines and school district ratings. My wars were fought over grid coordinates and kill boxes. The dramatic irony was a familiar weight in my chest. To them, I was Connie Brooks. 55, unmarried, no children. The quiet aunt who lived in a small house on the edge of town and drove a beat-up Jeep that was 2 decades old. I was a failure in their quiet suburban calculus, a cautionary tale, the woman who had been pretty and popular in high school and then stopped, faded. They thought my life was a long, slow, gentle decline into obscurity. They had no frame of reference for the truth. They couldn't comprehend that my life hadn't been a decline, but a deliberate, disciplined withdrawal from a world I no longer understood and had no interest in impressing. The silence they saw as emptiness was, for me, a fortress. Madison spotted me by the window. She glided over, her dress shimmering under the recessed lighting, Chad trailing in her wake like a pilot fish. "Aunt Connie, there you are, hiding in the corner," she said, her voice a little too loud, designed to draw the attention of those nearby. "Everyone, this is my Aunt Connie. You probably don't remember her." A few people turned and offered polite, vacant smiles. "She was a real firecracker back in the day," Madison continued, placing a proprietary hand on my arm. Her nails were long and pearlescent. "Captain of the cheerleading squad, you know? Honestly, she peaked in high school. Some people just don't have the drive to make something of themselves after that, you know? It's a shame." The words landed in the quiet air. They weren't meant to be overtly cruel. That wasn't Madison's style. They were worse. They were dismissive, an assessment delivered with the casual pity one might reserve for a stray dog, a final judgment on a life she knew nothing about. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. My heart rate remained a steady 60 beats per minute. I've had men with AK-47s screaming at me in languages I didn't understand. The vapid pronouncements of a 28-year-old influencer were like background noise, but the sentiment, the casual, unthinking cruelty of it, found an old wound. The scene dissolved. The lemon polish and champagne were replaced by the scent of my mother's pot roast and the stuffy heat of a Thanksgiving afternoon 35 years ago. I was 20, home from my second year at the academy. I wore my dress uniform, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar, the brass buttons gleaming. I was proud of it. It felt more real, more me, than any dress I had ever worn. My father, a man who ran a successful accounting firm and measured the world in profit margins, had cornered me by the fireplace. He held a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid. He hadn't looked at my uniform once. He had only looked at my face, his expression one of profound disappointment. "I don't understand this, Connie," he'd said, his voice low and heavy. "Flying planes, all this military nonsense. It's a man's world, a waste of your potential." "It's what I want to do, Dad," I had replied, my own voice barely a whisper. The certainty I felt on the training field, in the simulator, evaporated under his gaze. "What you want to do?" He'd scoffed, a bitter, dismissive sound. "You should be thinking about a husband, a family. You were homecoming queen. You could have married Mark Peterson's boy. He's going to take over the dealership. That's a future. This is a phase, a rebellion, and you're throwing your life away on it." He took a sip of his whiskey. All that potential, just wasted. That was the moment the silence began. I realized then that we were speaking different languages. His dictionary defined potential as a good marriage and a two-car garage. Mine defined it as the ability to push an airframe to Mach 1, to master avionic systems more complex than his entire tax code, to serve a purpose larger than my own happiness. There was no bridge between those two worlds. To explain my life to him would be like trying to describe color to a man born blind. It was a futile exercise. So I stopped trying. I stopped talking about my training. I stopped sharing the triumphs, the first solo flight, graduating at the top of my class in flight school. When I was deployed, I sent vague postcards that said, "All is well," and "Thinking of you." I let them build their own narrative. Connie, the strange, solitary daughter, the one who went away and came back, different, quieter. My silence became a discipline. In the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, an aircraft they affectionately call the Warthog, silence is essential. Unnecessary chatter on the radio clogs the frequency. You speak when you have something vital to communicate. Target confirmation, threat warnings, ordnance status. Every word has a purpose, a weight. You learn to listen more than you speak. You listen to the hum of the twin engines, to the slight variations in air pressure, to the clipped, calm voice of the Joint Terminal Attack Controller on the ground, the man whose life and the lives of the soldiers around him depends entirely on your ability to understand and execute. I carried that discipline home. It was a shield. It protected me from their pity, from their misunderstanding, from their well-meaning but utterly clueless advice. It kept the world of sand and fire and screaming metal separate from the world of pot roasts and suburban gossip. My life after active duty was a continuation of that silence. I bought a small house that backed onto a state forest. I got a job as a logistics consultant for a small defense contractor, a quiet desk job that used a fraction of my brain, but paid the bills and kept me connected, however tenuously, to the world I had left. Most days, I felt like a ghost. I'd sit in meetings where men in ill-fitting suits debated supply chain efficiency, and my mind would drift back to a dusty airfield in Kandahar, calculating fuel consumption rates for a mission over the Hindu Kush. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. My old Wrangler was my sanctuary. It was a simple machine. No touchscreens, no computerized systems, just metal, oil, and spark plugs. I knew its every bolt and wire. When the transmission acted up, I spent a weekend in my garage, covered in grease, methodically taking it apart and putting it back together. Chad had once seen me working on it. He'd pulled up in his silent, sterile Tesla and watched from a distance, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. He'd later told Madison that his car had to be towed 200 miles to a certified dealer just to fix a software glitch in the navigation system. He said it with a kind of pride, as if being helpless was a status symbol. Even now, at the party, the habits remained. As Madison prattled on, my eyes scanned the room. I noted the exits, 2 in the main room, 1 through the kitchen, plus the glass wall behind me. I clocked the security staff, their postures, the subtle bulges under their jackets. I observed the flow of the crowd, the natural choke points. It was automatic, reflexive, a threat assessment of a cocktail party. A bitter laugh formed in my throat, but I swallowed it. They saw a quiet woman in the corner. I saw a tactical problem with multiple variables. Aunt Connie works somewhere, Madison was explaining to a rapt couple. I think it's something with shipping. Honestly, I can never keep it straight. It sounds dreadfully boring. Chad chimed in, leaning forward with an air of magnanimous interest. So, Connie, he said, using my first name with a familiarity he hadn't earned, what do you do for fun? Book club? Gardening? He smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth. You have to have some hobbies to fill the time. Fill the time. The phrase hung there. My time had been filled with things he couldn't imagine. It was filled with the gut-wrenching lurch of a steep dive, the world spinning sideways, the ground rushing up to meet you. It was filled with the green, ghostly glow of the heads-up display at night, a river of data flowing in front of my eyes. It was filled with the earth-shaking brrrt of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon firing, a sound that you felt in your bones, a sound that meant friendlies on the ground were about to get a chance to breathe. It was filled with the metallic taste of fear in my mouth on a sortie gone wrong, the sky full of tracers, a missile lock alarm screaming in my headset, and it was filled with the faces of the young soldiers I'd meet on the tarmac after a mission. Kids, most of them, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion, but their eyes shining with a gratitude so profound it was humbling. They'd just look at you and nod, a silent acknowledgement that you were the angel on their shoulder, the thunder in the sky that had saved them from being overrun. That was how I had filled my time. I keep busy, I said. My voice was quiet, flat. Chad's smile widened. He took my response as a confirmation of his assumptions. That's good. It's important to stay active. He patted my shoulder, a gesture of pure condescension. Madison and I are thinking of taking a leadership seminar next month. It's all online from a top-tier life coach. Really teaches you how to maximize your personal brand. You should look into it. Might give you a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose? I looked at this boy with his soft skin and his blithe ignorance, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not offense, just a vast, empty distance. He thought purpose was something you bought in an online course. He thought a hashtag was a strategy. He lived in a world of surfaces, of appearances, and he was trying to teach me about depth. My brother, Richard, drifted over, drawn by the conversation. He'd heard Madison's peaked in high school comment and Chad's helpful advice. He put a heavy arm around me, his face etched with a familial pity. Don't you two mind your aunt, he said, though he was really speaking to me. Connie's from a different generation. They didn't have the same opportunities we do. It was a different world back then. He squeezed my shoulder, a clumsy gesture of comfort for a wound he couldn't see. He was trying to defend me, but his defense was just another form of dismissal. He was framing my life as a product of limitation, not of choice. He was reinforcing their narrative. Poor, quiet Connie left behind by the modern world. I focused on a point over his shoulder, a water stain on the high ceiling that looked vaguely like the coastline of Somalia. It was a grounding technique. Find a detail. Focus on it. Control your breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. The instructors at SEER School had drilled it into us. When the world dissolves into pain and fear and confusion, find one solid thing. Anchor yourself to it. The water stain, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, the rhythm of my own heart. They were all looking at me, waiting for a reaction, a tear, a protest, a justification. They wanted me to engage on their terms, to play their game. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I had learned a long time ago that you don't engage with hostiles unless it's on your own terms, at a time and place of your own choosing. This was not the time, this was not the place. So I gave them nothing. I simply stood there, a ghost in their midst, letting their words wash over me. They were talking about a character they had invented, a sad, lonely spinster named Aunt Connie. The person they were actually talking to, Colonel Connie Brooks, call sign Witch, with over 3,000 flight hours in a ground attack jet and a chest full of medals packed away in a footlocker, was not in the room. She was somewhere else entirely, flying high and silent in a place they could never reach. The disconnect was so complete, it was almost peaceful. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing the scene from a great height. The moment was broken by a new presence. A young man in a crisp waiter's uniform was navigating the crowd, his expression a mixture of panic and determination. He scanned the faces, his eyes wide. He looked like a private on his first day at the motor pool, tasked with finding the commanding officer. He zeroed in on our group, his gaze flicking between us. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He was holding a cell phone as if it were a live grenade. "I'm so sorry to interrupt." Madison turned, annoyed at the intrusion. "What is it?" The waiter swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on me. I have a call for a Colonel Brooks?" The name dropped into the conversation like a 500-pound bomb. The air went still. "Colonel?" The word was utterly alien in this environment. It didn't belong here amidst the champagne and the small talk. It was a word of iron and authority, of rank and responsibility. Madison frowned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together. "Colonel? You must have the wrong person. There's no colonel here." Chad snorted. "Yeah, buddy, I think you're lost." But the waiter was still looking at me. His eyes were locked on mine. Something in my stillness, in my bearing, must have told him he had the right target. Slowly, deliberately, I held out my hand. The room seemed to shrink, the ambient chatter fading to a dull hum. Every eye in our little circle was on me. The waiter, visibly relieved, placed the phone in my hand. It was a standard-issue satellite phone, bulky and black, a piece of equipment that had no business being at an engagement party in suburban Virginia. I lifted it to my ear, my posture shifted. It was a subtle change, almost imperceptible, but it was total. My shoulders squared, my spine straightened. The quiet, faded aunt receded and someone else took her place. Someone harder, colder, more focused. "Brooks," I said. My voice was different. The warmth was gone. It was crisp, clear, and stripped of all inflection. It was the voice I used on the radio, the voice of command. The voice on the other end was tinny, distorted by the satellite connection, but I would have recognized it anywhere. It was the voice of General David Harmon, a man I had served under in 2 different theaters of war, a man who did not make social calls. "Colonel Brooks," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "Apologies for the unconventional channel. We're on a compressed timeline." I listened, my eyes fixed on the water stain on the ceiling. My family was frozen, watching me, their faces a canvas of disbelief. "Iran crossed a line in the Strait of Hormuz an hour ago. A Navy destroyer has been hit. The situation is escalating. The president has authorized a recall of reserve pilots with CAS experience. We're scrambling assets. My mind was already working. CAS close air support. That meant A-10s. That meant me. We need experienced hands, Connie, people who know the mission cold. We need you. Understood, sir, I said. What's your readiness status? I'm green across the board, General, ready to fly. Good. I need you at Andrews Air Force Base. Wheels up for transport in 3 hours. Can you make it? I'll be there in 2, I said. Godspeed, Colonel. You as well, sir. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and handed it back to the stunned waiter, who took it with a fumbling hand and scurried away. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier, more profound than any silence my family had ever imposed on me. My brother was staring, his mouth slightly agape. Carol's hand was pressed to her chest. Madison looked as if she'd been slapped. I turned to face them. I met Madison's wide, confused eyes. Then I reached into the simple, worn leather purse that hung from my shoulder. I pushed past the tube of lip balm, the wallet, the small canister of pepper spray. My fingers found the familiar, hard plastic rectangle. I pulled it out and placed it on the small table next to the champagne bucket. It was my United States Air Force Reserve identification card, laminated, a bit frayed at the edges. My picture, taken 10 years ago but still recognizably me, stared up from the card, and beneath it the words Brooks, Connie S., and below that my rank, Colonel, the totem. The proof! The object that translated my hidden world into a language they could, for the first time, begin to understand. Chad, the crypto bro fiancé, was the first to process it. His father was a mid-level executive at a major defense contractor. He knew the names, he knew the protocols. His face went pale. The name General Harmon had registered. The urgency of the satellite call had registered. The rank on the ID card had registered. He had been holding his champagne flute, poised to take a smug sip. His hand trembled. He made a small, choking sound as he inhaled, the bubbles catching in his throat. He started to cough, a wet, panicked sound, spilling golden liquid down the front of his pastel blazer. The hierarchy of his world had just been violently inverted. The quiet, pathetic old aunt he had been patronizing moments before was a full-bird colonel, being personally activated by a 4-star general for a shooting war. His brain couldn't handle the sudden, brutal recalculation. I looked from his sputtering face to my brother. I have to go, I said, my voice calm and even. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't storm out. I moved with the same deliberate, unhurried pace I always did. I could feel their eyes on my back, 100 questions burning in the air behind me. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. The silence had been broken, not by my words, but by the reality of my life finally, irrevocably intruding upon theirs. The cool night air was a relief. I walked across the manicured lawn, my sensible flat shoes leaving faint impressions in the damp grass. I reached my Wrangler, parked on the street among the Teslas and imported sedans. It looked like a relic from another time, dented and unapologetically utilitarian. It looked like me. I slid into the driver's seat. The familiar smell of old vinyl and a faint trace of motor oil filled my lungs. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life, a low, powerful growl that was more comforting than any words of praise had ever been. As I pulled away from the curb, the lights of my brother's house receded in the rearview mirror. The party, the people, the petty cruelties, it all seemed impossibly small now. It was a scene from a play I was no longer a part of. The curtain had come down. My mind was already miles away, flying east toward the coast. I was running checklists, pre-flight procedures, threat intelligence updates for the Persian Gulf, munitions loadouts, rules of engagement. The lethal, intricate calculus of my real profession asserted itself. pushing aside the trivialities of the evening. The woman who had stood silently in the corner was gone. Colonel Brooks was back on duty. They had spent years judging me by their metrics of success: marriage, money, social status. They saw my life as empty because it wasn't filled with the things they valued. They couldn't see the accomplishments that were invisible, the victories that were classified. My trophies weren't framed on a wall. They were written in the smoke trails of spent rockets over foreign deserts, in the grateful eyes of a platoon of Marines who thought they were taking their last stand, in the quiet, profound satisfaction of a mission completed and a duty done. My worth wasn't measured in followers or likes. It was measured in the lives of the men and women on the ground who made it home to their families, because I and others like me were watching over them from the sky. That was my purpose, the one Chad thought I could find in an online seminar. For 35 years, I had held my silence, not out of shame or weakness, but out of a deep, unshakable understanding that my world was mine alone. Silence wasn't an absence of noise, it was the space where the real work got done. It was the discipline that kept you alive, the focus that brought you home. Tonight, that silence had been broken by the call of duty, a language far older and more powerful than the chatter of a cocktail party. I merged onto the interstate, the Wrangler's big tires humming on the pavement. The glow of the city faded behind me, and the dark, open road stretched out ahead. I was heading east, toward the base, toward the flight line, toward the familiar shape of a warthog waiting under the cold sodium lights. I was going home,